So today's lesson is called Mean Absolute Deviation, also known as MAD. So we'll use that abbreviation frequently. What the MAD is the distance that a data set is from the mean. So also remember what a data set is. It's a set of numbers. So we're going to be finding the mean in two different ways with this so that we can find the mean absolute deviation. We're also going to be using absolute value. Notice that the word absolute is in there. And deviation just really pretty much means difference. So you know all these things. We're going to apply them in a different way, though. So one thing, if we determine the MAD and it is a large number, we know that the data is spread out. So the measure of variability is pretty wide. Okay, there's a wide range. Now, conversely, if your MAD is small, and what I mean by that is that it's closer to 0, your data is close together. Which means that it's closer to the overall mean. So it's not very spread apart. So there are certain steps that we need to do to find the MAD. So the first step is to find the mean of all the data listed. So that's really important. That would be step one. Next, you're going to subtract the mean from each number in the data set. Basically, we're finding the distance. Now, this should be reminiscent of absolute value. When we subtract and then we find the absolute value of a number, it's not negative anymore. We're just looking at the distance. And that's basically what we're doing here. We're finding the distance between the mean and the actual numbers. Then to find the MAD, you're going to find the mean of the distances. I know that sounds confusing, but when you see us do it together, you're going to be like, oh, I get it. So I'm going to scroll in a tiny bit so that we can get a little bit closer and make sure we see our steps. So if I have this data set, I'm going to try to find the MAD. So to find the MAD, actually, and I'll even write my directions here, find your MAD, okay? So the first step is to find the mean of all the data. So what I have to do is add these numbers together. 10 and 10 is 20. 7 plus 7 is 14, so 20 plus 14 is 24. I'm sorry, 34. I already messed that up. And 34 plus 17 is 51. So that's the total, but that's not the mean. Remember, the mean is when we divide by the total number of data added together, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 51 divided by 6. So my mean is 8 5/10. I could have just divided, or I could have used my handy dandy calculator. So that was step one. Okay, now step two. We're going to subtract the mean, that number, this number, 8 5/10, from each number in the data set. Well, here's my numbers. I'm going to make my life a little easy. I'm going to just write my number down here. Now, I have to recall that 8 5/10, if I'm subtracting it from a whole number, I have to remember that there is a 0 here, so I can do 8 5/10, and I subtract, and I end up with 1 5/10. Now I'm going to subtract 8 5/10 from here. Now when I do that, I end up with a negative 1 1/2. Now I said I need to use the absolute value because I cannot have a negative number. What is the absolute value of a negative 1.5? It's 1.5. And I'm going to continue subtracting. So I would take minus 8. And look at, I end up with 5. I'm going to put commas between these so that they don't get confused. I have to subtract again. Now, I'm going to end up with a negative 5/10. Oops, I didn't put 5/10 there. Which ends up having to be a 5/10. So basically, I can look at this and say, well, that would be 1 5/10. This would be a negative 1 5/10, and which I would, as the absolute value, would be 1 5/10. So now my list of data that's subtracted from 8 5/10 ends up being 1 5/10, 1 5/10, 5/10, 5/10, 1 5/10, and 1 5/10. Now, that was step 2. A lot of work, but we can do it. But now step 3, we find the mean of this data. So how do I find the mean? I add these numbers together, and then I divide by the set of numbers. How many numbers are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I divide by 6. Remember, if we put our fraction bar over and then our number underneath, that means division. So when I add these together, I end up with 3, 3, and 1, which is 7 divided by 6. And when I finish this, I end up with a 1 and 1/6. And I'm going to just round it to the tenths. And I end up with 1 2/10. And that is my MAD. So this was step 3. It's not that it's a hard thing, it's that it's a new thing. You just have to follow the steps as delivered.